Hello, students of Pali, and welcome back to this continuing companion series to A.K. Warder's Grammar Guide, an introduction to Pali. Now, Warder packs a lot into Lesson 20, though it is a bit of a mixed bag, and I'm going to rearrange the sections which Warder covers and place all the declension subjects together so it flows a bit better in this tutorial. And you might have to jump around a bit if you're reading the book. First, we'll clear up several noun declensions, then look at the number 4 before returning to compounds, and finally we'll cover a rare type of passive aorist. There's actually quite a lot to cover, so let's get on. This is Pali Studies on the Learn Pali channel. So, we begin with the declension of feminine nouns, and specifically those ending in a long or a short I. And as we've been doing, we can look at the paradigms of these example nouns. The feminine paradigms then are actually much simpler, with many of the cases sharing the same endings. And note that there are some contracted forms, and these are mainly found in poetry. If we ignore these rare contracted forms, we can see then that the two stem endings are almost identical, except for the nominative singular. And as Warder points out, a few words like itty, woman, can use either form. Okay. Next, let's look at the declension of masculine nouns in long U. And if we return to our gender and noun stem ending map, only a few masculine nouns have a stem in the long U. And so if we look at the declensional paradigm, we can see that nouns of this group are declined almost the same as masculine nouns in short U that we saw last week. Except the nominative singular ends in a long U and the plural has uno as an ending. So, nice and simple. So far, we've just been looking at noun stems that end in a vowel, and these are by far the majority, but there are a few noun stems which end in a consonant. This final consonant, I think, is a remnant from Sanskrit, and in Pali it can be thought of as a placeholder to distinguish the different declensional groups. But be aware that grammar guides and even some dictionaries differ in the application of these consonantal endings. And when looking at this map, the ending ANT and IN are adjectival and so span every gender. So if we now take the first of these and look at the declension of nouns ending AS. Noun stems that end AS are not very frequent in Pali, but of those that exist, many are key terms. For instance, manas, chetas, tapas, tamas, and sotas. I think these are all actually neuter, but if we look at their declensions, they appear like masculine nouns in the nominative. In the plural, if they occur at all, they take the normal A-stem ending, though these are extremely rare. And if you try to look these up in the Pali English Dictionary, they're actually listed under their nominative singular ending. Next, let's jump to the section on Bhagavant, Rajan and Silavant. We covered some endings of Bhagavant and Rajan back in Lesson 3, but for completeness, here are the full paradigms now. Rajan is an example of another one of our noun groups that end in a consonant. Noun stems that end in an are either masculine or neuter, and Rajan is a masculine an noun stem, and we'll see the neuter in Lesson 22, I think. Again, with this paradigm there are several contracted forms and some irregularity. And in fact, Warder now lists several irregular masculine nouns. The stem puman usually declines like a regular A-stem noun. However, there are some rare forms that follow adan. And if you want to look these up in the PED, you have to ignore that final n of the stem. So, let's now return to Bhagavant. Bhagavant is in fact a derivative adjective, taking the possessive suffix vant. Warder glosses over adjectives ending in ant, but these are quite an important group and are worth a little more investigation. The word itself is a combination of bhaga, which means luck or fortune, and the possessive suffix vant. As a straight adjective, it means possessing the quality or state of good fortune. And like any adjective in Pali, it can also stand as a substantive in its own right, when it means one who possesses such a quality. And so we get the fortunate one or the blessed one. Now we've seen the masculine declension before, but being an adjective it actually declines across all three of the genders. And silavant is similar in that it means to possess sila, or virtue, and thus we get the virtuous one. There are actually several suffixes in Pali which indicate possession, and here we're looking at vant, but also mant. Vant is applied only to nouns which end in a long or a short a, while the suffix mant can be added to any noun, but always to nouns which end in an I or an U. And these then follow similar declensions. You drop the final ant part of the stem, but keep the v and m before adding one of the following declensional endings. And just to make things more interesting, as well as these, often the usual A-stem declension pattern is added directly to the ant suffix. Okay, let's jump again to the numeral chatur. The number 4 is only found in the plural, but inflects in all three genders, well, at least in the nominative and accusative. It then behaves like an adjective, and so agrees with the substantive it qualifies. And hopefully this is no surprise for anyone. Okay. Next, let's return to Bahu-Bihi compounds. Warder briefly looks at some three-member compounds. I'm a little confused as to what he's trying to say here, other than Bahu-Bihis can act as a metaphor. So here, the full moon face teacher means the teacher whose face is like a full moon. I think we pretty much covered this in the last lesson, so let's move on swiftly. To consider verbal compounds. All the compounds we've looked at so far have been between nouns or adjectives. But it is possible to have a verb as a final member, and these are usually some form of the root ka, to do, or bu, to be, which then can take a noun or an adjective as an initial member. When compounded in this way, most often a long or a short I is inserted between the noun and the verb, and these then tend to act like a verbal prefix, modifying the meaning of the verb. And from the verb root bu, occasionally a nominal form which is derived from the verb root can be the final member. For instance, patu bhavo means one's appearance. Finally, let's finish with the section on the passive aorist. If you remember from lesson 9, a passive stem can be formed by adding ya directly to the root, and these then can take the aorist endings that we saw way back in lesson 4. And this is the usual way to create a passive past tense verb. But in this section, Warden notes a rare passive aorist verb form. So instead of taking the infix ja, the verb root is merely strengthened to the verdigrade, a bit like a causative verb. And they also take the augment. And this form of passive aorist verb is only found in the third person. So if we now take the other of Warder's examples, remember that the augment comes before any prefix, and so we get de par di. These can be quite hard to recognise as we really only have the lengthened root and the augment to go by. Well, that was a quick run-through of Lesson 20. The exercises, at least the passages for translation, are getting quite long now, so remember my tip from Lesson 18 and use some tools to help. The answers to the exercises can be found by following the links down in the description below, and next week we fill in more declension groups and return to present participles. Until then, there's always my other tutorials and of course my blog. Thank you for watching.